I mean, look, there's things that you can do to protect the youth, but like, you're not afraid because of how big of a threat it is. You're afraid because it seems to be helping them to establish a counterculture that you don't understand and you can't control. And so, just be honest.
Have you ever heard the urban legend about the group of hippie college students that went blind while staring at the sun during an LSD trip, their retinas essentially burned to a crisp? This tale became a very powerful anecdote in the 1960s as acid was entering public consciousness and politicians were working to regulate its spread across college campuses. For this episode, the legend-tripping, psychedelic Sarah Marshall of the podcasts You're Wrong About and You Are Good jumps down two rabbit holes with me, one that leads to a messy political hoax in Philadelphia and another to a conspiracy theory created, for once, by little old me. I'll show her a record of this alleged tragic incident through the archives of newspapers.com, where we can see how a sensational story like this one can be just what the anti-LSD doctor ordered, helping to drum up the kind of public support against a newly declared national drug menace that can become the law and order victory of an opportunist politician's dreams. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I am so excited to be joined on a psychedelic trip with my dear friend and collaborator, Sarah Marshall. Thank you so much for taking a tab of acid and going along what I think is a very strange trail.
You're welcome, Chelsey Weber-Smith. For people who are confused, I'm not literally on acid, but I hope that what you're about to tell me makes me feel like I am.
I will do my best, babe. So I want to just start, before we get into our specific story, I want to ask you what urban legends you heard about acid growing up.
Okay. There's sort of the general, like, oh, the hippies are painting LSD on doorknobs, and if you touch the doorknob, then you'll have a bad trip or whatever. And kind of the maybe urban legend. It's probably not even detailed enough to be called a legend because, did you hear this guy jumped off a roof because he was on acid and he thought he could fly?
Yes.
Which I believe there's a Bill Hicks routine about, like, what that story proves? That guy's an asshole. Take off from the ground.
Well, all of the legends that you're saying are like total classics, and they're all part of something called acid lore.
Acid lore. That should be a Taylor Swift album.
Oh, yeah. Man, Taylor Swift needs some acid, I actually feel.
Yes, so did some of her fans.
Yeah. But I just like to, when I have the opportunity, talk about the specific name because, there's fax lore, which was all the stuff that got sent around like as chain letters and fax machines. Yeah. And then there's Coke lore. So like all the stuff about Coca-Cola. There's like, I like when there's enough legends about one thing that it gets its own term. Yeah. So we're in acid lore today. So the urban legend that I want to talk about with you today, I'm just going to read you the first article that came out that began this story. Okay. And then we can talk about whether you've heard it before. This story came out in Pennsylvania on January 13th, 1968. Students using LSD permanently blinded. Ew. 6 Western Pennsylvania college students are undergoing rehabilitation after being permanently blinded by staring at the sun while under the influence of LSD. Norman M. Yoder, state commissioner for the blind, said Friday that the students, all male juniors, were totally blinded 18 months ago on the campus of a Western Pennsylvania school. He said the students aged 18 to 21, whom he described as nice kids, not hippies, right, took the drug and then relaxed in a sunny meadow near campus. The effects of the drug produced loss of consciousness and apparently kept the youth's eyelids from closing, and the sun burned their retinas while they were in a semi-stupor, he said.
I think that that's what they said happened, but really they all decided to look at the sun.
Maybe. Yoder said the students lay on the ground about 8 hours. They were sightless when found by classmates.
Like baby mice.
Yoder, who himself is legally blind, would not identify the students, nor would he disclose the name of the college. He said the students are now undergoing remedial training to enable them to live near normal lives.
Don't do acid, kids.
All have returned to classes since the incident, he said, but not at the same school. Quote, they have a terrific psychological problem to overcome, he said. They're trying to figure out where we go from here in a totally new life.
Do these children have names?
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Yoder said the rehabilitation by the State Welfare Department's Office of the Blind involves training in how to travel with a white cane, learning Braille, and all of the skills needed to live as handicapped persons. He said 2 of the students were studying engineering at the time of the incident and had to give up their career plans following blindness. They are now preparing for the future in the teaching, social services, and rehabilitation fields, he said.
Maybe you should have interviewed some of them, newspaper writer.
Well, we'll see why maybe they didn't soon.
Oh, boy.
So we're going to take this story and we are going to go like day by day and how this unfolded in the newspapers. So just imagine yourself as someone in 1968 who reads that story and decides, I'd like to know more.
I would like to know more. I'm going to keep an eye on it.
Really vague.
While I work on my macrame.
Yep. And this was a big story all over the country, but it really unfolded in Pennsylvania, the entire story, right? But the first kind of like kids were blinded by LSD was wired all over the country. So everyone hears that part.
Yep.
And then it continues to unfold more locally. So, of course, immediately the press was like, who are these college students that you didn't name? And you didn't name the college. Like, we want more information so we can continue to, cover this story in a meaningful way.
But it was CMU.
So just a little bit of context, this is 1968. So it's in the middle of kind of the big pushback against LSD, right? We had kind of the earlier 60s where it's being touted as this possible miracle drug in psychology to heal things like PTSD. Then we get to the point where it's starting to become obvious that the street versions of LSD are causing bad trips for people and also contributing to social unrest, maybe, right? Contributing to the civil rights movement. That's the underlying messages that we know. Like LSD is this bad drug that is helping people expand their minds, which we do not like.
Right.
So there's a big pushback and parents are freaked out that their kids are, tripping out. And, it's, I think to be fair, LSD is scary sometimes.
It's intense and there's valid concerns. And of course, also what you get depends on who made it and how, and so you could get some good stuff or something not so good. And it makes sense to have concerns about people sort of like exploring aspects of their mind that perhaps they are not prepared for because they're 15.
Absolutely.
And this idea of like kind of using it therapeutically is different from just kind of, I don't know, treating it like the big new snack cookie.
Definitely.
Which is how we treat our recreational drugs sometimes in this country. But also it feels like there's both like reasonable fears and also, such a strong current of like, don't expand your mind. Keep it small. We like it that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there are fair aspects to it. And then there are definitely politicians taking advantage of a moment.
And there's a crazy episode of Dragnet about it.
Yes. And I have watched it recently for this series. And it is.
He kept saying he wanted to get higher and higher.
They mentioned the blinded students in that episode.
Oh my God.
I know. Isn't that great? I'm so happy you brought that up.
Of course.
You never know what Sarah Marshall's got in her pop culture arsenal.
Every so often it's Dragnet.
I know. Yeah. I know. So the press continues to ask Dr. Yoder questions. And again, he is state commissioner for the blind. So he's, has a government position. He's blind himself. And he is being like pretty avoidant of details. So he is asked again by the press, give the names of the students or at least the college. And he's saying, I can't. I'm forbidden by law to release the names.
They're minors, just like Alice from Go Ask Alice.
But they're not minors. They're college students.
Yes.
Yeah. But he says, and it was kind of a contentious thing, but he says because of confidentiality laws around like medical records, he can't say who they are, and the students do not want to be identified and are actually he's like, they're refusing to talk to me.
But they do want their case to be talked about in the newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, so it's like, okay, all right, fair enough. And, I appreciate you not calling out these students. That's fine.
You're not a doctor, so you're not really bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, but, whatever.
Yeah, and it's like, whatever. He's all right. It's like, I'm not mad at him. But he then basically says the students won't talk to me about it, so I can't really tell you anything more. He says one of the students said, give me 6 months and then maybe I can. Like they're just very upset by the whole, being fried in the eyes by the sun incident, which, pretty upsetting.
That's true. Yeah.
So he says all the students have transferred to other colleges or other curriculums where they could better function.
And they didn't leave a forwarding address, so don't bother.
Yeah. He says all are doing well academically. They are coming around less rapidly socially. I suppose it's because of an element of shame and remorse.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear.
It's like a cautionary tale, if you will.
Yeah, it's a pretty perfect cautionary tale so far.
Almost too perfect.
I know, it is, isn't it? You're onto something. So then the FDA spokesman tells the press that although Yoder's not given up the goods, they are now investigating this case. And they're also interested in possible criminal prosecution of the people who gave LSD to the students.
Oh, Yoder, what have you done?
Oh, Yoder. So now we're going to meet two very important characters in our story.
Okay.
The first one is State Senator Benjamin Dunnelow.
Okay.
He's a Democrat for Philadelphia.
Hello, Benjamin Dunnelow.
You know him?
No.
Okay.
Just like to greet people sometimes.
I was going to say niche. Niche politics. He claims that drug use is widespread on Pennsylvania college campuses. And this story is just the latest tragic example.
He's like, guess what? There are hundreds of college students in Pennsylvania who have also gone blind by staring at the sun, and you don't even care.
No, and you don't care. And that was kind of his vibe. Next, we have Republican Governor Raymond P. Schaefer. Okay. He's also extremely concerned about the story.
Schaefer and Dunnelow for all your footwear needs.
So they're both kind of saying that they know the college and saying that they know who the students are.
Oh my God.
But they're not saying, and then they're kind of saying the other one should say it.
Oh my God.
And they're starting a feud. Okay.
And they're falling in love.
They're falling in love. They're kissing on acid, which no fun. So Dunnelow is saying that he knows the name of the school and he has for 2 weeks, but he's like, I'm not going to say it. The senator says,
I've known for 2 weeks. I'm not going to tell you.
I'm not telling you. And then he says that he tried to conduct a probe of drug abuse on campuses 2 years before, but Schaefer's predecessor, another Republican, ordered it halted.
Oh, no.
So it's like already kind of like a way to kind of snip at each other, at the other party, essentially. So then the next day comes. This is January 15th, 1968. All of these stories are trying to figure out which college it is. So there are little mini investigations happening. One of the big contenders is Pennsylvania State University, who's accused of being the ones who are like, because it's all like they have to be hiding this, right? Because it's such a wild story that it's like the colleges must be repressing it. So the president of the college denies that the students are attending his school. And he says, I don't believe this story entirely. How in the world could any school hide a thing like that? Then Carnegie Mellon is also accused of being the school that this happened at.
Might as well just accuse them all just to see what happens.
Well, that's kind of what was going on because all they had to go on was Western Pennsylvania.
Right.
And the dean of students there tells the papers that to him, it sounds like a folk story. He said, the student said he heard about such, and before you know it, what is merely hearsay becomes part of fact in a state record. So
ask a college type, get a college answer.
Exactly. So same day, Dunalow is quoted in the papers. He's angry that people are denying the reality that these poor sick students were blinded.
Yes. How dare they?
Yes. He said, we ought to know what the school did about it, what its policy was before, and what the school has done since then. And it's like, okay, well,
what its policy on what? Staring at the sun?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. They were off campus. And like, it's just also kind of like, well, you're not telling anyone anything, but you're saying you know things and you're saying things should be done, but you're refusing to do them.
Yes.
So it's fishy.
And also, you know, one might remain hung up on the whole acid kept their eyes open thing on top of everything else.
Exactly. And yeah, there are like instances of different doctors being like, I don't know if acid can override your survival sense of closing your eyes.
Yeah.
You know,
but then he could probably always find some doctor somewhere who's like, yeah, I bet that would happen.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? So the next day, the Senator Dunalow is continuing to be poked at by the press and other politicians being like, tell us what you know. And so he announces startling disclosures on LSD. So he's going to give a press conference the next day. And it's like pretty heavily implied that he's finally going to do it. He's finally going to release the name of the school and the students. And, you know, we will finally know which school to be really angry at and what to do about it.
Thank God.
So this is like such a big news conference that the New York Times, Washington Post, every prominent Pennsylvania newspaper, reporters from New Jersey, Delaware, and even British reporters were there. Like it was, you know, a big, a big to-do. So I wanted to share with you a very fun article that was very critical of Dunalow.
I'm excited.
And their description of this press conference is very fun. So it's from the Pennsylvania Daily News and it's from January 17th. So from the time the article came out, we've only gone 4 days.
A very stressful 4 days for some people, I bet.
Yeah. It's a big story. And people are following it because basically every piece of the story is just, when are you going to tell us a story?
Yeah.
So, you know, people are hanging on to it like they're on the edge of their seats. So this article is called Dunalow's LSD Shocker Turns Out to Be a Bad Trip. It had the biggest advance ballyhoo since the first Super Bowl and the smallest fulfillment since Minnie Mouse had an incubator baby.
Minnie Mouse had an incubator baby?
That was my question, Sarah.
Where'd the baby go?
Couldn't find anything about what that means. Couldn't find us. I looked for about an hour everywhere I could.
Let's do an episode on that. Let's just put a pin in it.
Who is Minnie Mouse's incubator baby?
And why aren't they mentioned and we didn't start the fire?
Dude, yes, no kidding. It's important. Like, it's a really missed opportunity. The show was called Ben Dunalow's Startling Disclosures. It received unanimously bad reviews from the press. State Senator Dunalow yesterday summoned the news media to the elegant red and gilt Academy Room of the Bellevue Stratford via telegrams that promised startling disclosures concerning the LSD use on Pennsylvania campuses.
What year is it, sir? That is pretty cool, though. You're a journalist and you get a telegram promising startling disclosures.
Pretty cool.
That's pretty good.
Any startling disclosure I want to be there for, personally.
Yeah. People should promote books like that.
I agree. The wires did not pledge that Dunalow would reveal the name of the Western Pennsylvania college, but there was an implied hint that he intended to spill it.
He got up there and was like, I have something to share with you all. I have bursitis.
Bursitis of the hip, in fact. which is something I thought I had once.
Yeah, me too once. It turned out I just wasn't very used to hiking.
Yeah, twins. I skanked too hard at a wedding. I'm not kidding. Don't tell anyone that, everyone.
That's a better story.
It contained all manner of electronic journalists, cameramen, lightmen, soundmen, preening TV personalities. At 5 minutes after 3, Dunalow strode in, a balding man in a dark blue double-breasted suit of costly cut.
Oh.
Dunalow said...
Beautiful phrasing.
Yeah, I know. I feel like a gay man wrote this.
Yeah.
Dunalow said, quote, I've been barraged by calls from the press in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and other states, all requesting information about the LSD incident. I called this press conference to make you people aware of the drug situation on college campuses. My staff and I have investigated and determined it is true that 6 students took LSD and lost their eyesight 18 months ago. So that's a full-throated endorsement of this story, right?
I am not a crook.
I am not a crook. The article continues. He said that the students who found them were, quote, sworn to secrecy by the college. He said the LSD had been made by students on campus from photos of a formula recipe through mail from another state.
Oh, no, not mail.
Which again is like really hyper specific,
yeah.
Right? Like that's a very specific thing to say, as is the like sworn to secrecy. Like
that's just insane. I don't think colleges can do that, to be honest.
Like it's like these students stumbled upon these like, you know, people in a field like passed out with their eyeballs burned, and the college was like, don't tell anyone.
And it's like, you know, I think there's a higher authority than Gettysburg or whatever.
It's just it's quite it's a big accusation to make against the institutions of higher learning of your state.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And of course, this is a nice moment to be demonizing college education because kids are going off and realizing that perhaps the Vietnam War can't be won.
Interesting. Really interesting. So Dunalow is quoted in this article as saying, I will not now release the names of the students or the institution. This morning I received a call from Harrisburg prevailing upon me not to release the name of the school until after the investigation by the administration.
Oh.
Convenient.
Calling in Harrisburg.
Yeah.
State capital. Bit of trivia for you all.
Yeah. Oh, is that really? I didn't know that.
Yes. I doubted myself, but yes.
So the article goes on to say, at his side was a surprise guest, a tall young fellow with very dark hair and dirty fingernails.
Oh, no.
He's wearing a mask. Sarah, I'd like to send you a photo.
Oh, God, yeah.
Of Dunalow with his masked companion, all right?
I'm so excited to see this mask. I wonder if he looks like the guy in the video for Laura Branigan's Self-Control, or does he look like the comic with the bag over his head, or is it an umpire's mask?
Describe what you see.
He's wearing like a basic, like over the eyes and nose mask that you would get at Michael's as like a template for if you were going to like a masquerade ball themed MLM party, and he had to hot glue feathers to it. Yeah,
it's very like Zorro.
Yes, it's very
or like
Wesley in The Princess Bride.
Yes. Do you notice anything else about this masked man?
He's got a cleft chin. He's got a sweater on and a blazer, and that's about it.
The answer I was looking for is he's hot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's pretty good looking.
He's good looking. Yes. But yeah, he's got kind of a dark academia vibe going on.
He's got some nice lips.
Yeah. He's pretty boy. So the article continues. Then the senator introduced the masked guest. He said he was a dropout from a college near Philadelphia and had taken 200 LSD trips, an average of 1 a day.
For 200 days.
Does he look like somebody that did acid 200 days in a row?
No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
I mean, I don't even know what that would do to you, but it would be a lot to take.
Let's just say you'd have longer hair.
Quite likely, yeah. Although I guess he has let his fingernails go undealt with.
True.
But no, he's dressed. He's got like an Oxford shirt on under a sweater, under a blazer. You know, he's dressed like he's going to go meet his girlfriend's dad at the yacht club.
Absolutely. The masked witness lectured briefly on his various trips and said, in answer to a question by Dunalow, quote,
I killed Jeffrey McDonald's family. Sorry.
LSD is used by quite a few students. It is extremely available. Anyone that wants to get it can.
Scintillating.
Dunalow edged the masked scholar away from the mics and made his big announcement of the day, quote, my staff and I are presently preparing a bill, an all-inclusive bill, to face the rise of drug use in Pennsylvania.
Because Pennsylvania, fuck other states.
He said the bill would be non-punitive, which is nice. I appreciate that. And, quote, provide a total approach to the drug problem and would be introduced when the Senate reconvenes in March.
Well, wouldn't that be a nice little career move?
Yes. The article continues to say, the masked witness is a Dunalow trademark.
What?
And at that point, I was like,
Dunalow, what have you been up to?
We're going to need to find out more about that. So we're going to pause on our story. We're going to figure out Dunalow's masked witness pattern. Okay. All right. So I, of course, went right back into newspapers.com and tried to find more.
You're like, Dunalow, masked witness.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. So what I found was that in May of 1966, Dunalow brought in a man with a bright blue hood covering his face who he called Frank, who he said had bought heroin off of a police officer.
Oh, no. And that man was the Unabomber.
So I'm going to show you a picture that's going to blow your fucking mind in a second. So an article that I read about this instance of a masked witness went like this. Frank was one of 5 hooded witnesses testifying before the legislative panel. A former college student and a high school pupil with faces covered said the cost of the narcotics habit led girls into prostitution and shoplifting and boys into homosexual acts.
Okay.
Both testified that it was easy to obtain dangerous drugs and narcotics ranging from marijuana and barbiturates to cocaine and heroin if one had the money.
I like how they're like, the really scary thing about heroin is that it's a gateway drug to being gay.
That's one of its better qualities. Masked witness John said he was able to finance the habit without recourse to crime, but girls in his college circle turned to prostitution and shoplifting for money to buy narcotics.
What college did he go to? Oh, wouldn't you like to know?
Yeah. I can't tell you. Robert, a 17-year-old still on the rolls of his high school, although now in prison for possession of narcotics, said his addiction cost him $15 to $20 a day, and he resorted to homosexual acts to raise the funds.
Oh, no. You know, those aren't even always paid in real life.
No, that's true. All right. I'm going to show you a new... Sarah,
Chelsey,
please describe this masked witness that Dunalow presented at said event.
Oh, God. No. This looks like Baghead Jason from Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Please describe for those who may not know what you're referencing.
Okay. Well, the caption says, masked student, a young dope addict, wears a hood to hide his identity as he testifies Thursday in Philadelphia at a legislative hearing into the use of narcotics on college, blah, blah, blah. And so he's just got a bag or a piece of cloth draped over his head and then tied with a little piece of string with eye holes and a nose hole cut out of it. And he's just a man with a bag over his head. It's like, God, if you're going to have a masked witness, at least give them a real mask and not a bag, is what I would say.
It's really scary. It looks really scary to me.
Yeah. And I guess because he's like, because drugs are scary. So that's why this man has a bag on his head.
Yes.
It's a town that dreaded sundown. It's the legislature that dreaded sundown.
It does look like that. It does look like the
right?
Yes. The town that dreaded sundown. I do think we should say that Dunalow did perfect his method by using a different mask.
Yeah, I guess he was still working it out.
More after this. And now back to the show. He used the same guy, Frank, I don't know if that's Frank in the picture, but we can assume that Frank was wearing a similar mask. He used this guy in September of 1966. So this is again 2 years before the story we're talking about today, during a legislative committee on narcotics, where Timothy Leary was speaking about how it was against the constitutional rights of people to criminalize LSD. So he brought in Frank and, you know, used Frank to kind of make his point about the dangers of LSD.
To be like, well, I'm a baghead man, so
look what LSD did to my head.
God.
I know. All right. Now that we've solved the mystery of Dunillow's masked witnesses.
Yeah. So there was never like an expose really about this that you found. He just kind of pulled this and people were like, all right, whatever.
Yeah. I mean,
or I guess maybe this story is sort of the end of the road for him.
Well, it might be.
No.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the fun, cheeky article.
Perfect.
That we were reading before by that gay man that I'm assuming is gay.
Yeah.
His colleague and co-crusader, Senator Thomas McCreish, said that he would introduce legislation in March to amend the Dangerous Drug Act to impose a 5-year jail sentence and $10,000 fine for the illegal sale, possession, use, purchase, or manufacturing of LSD. So although Dunillow's like, we're just going to be non-punitive, the guy he's working with is like, no, we're going to fucking ream everybody now.
Yeah.
So it's classic political bullshit.
Yeah.
He then accused Governor Schaefer of keeping back information, which of course he is also doing.
Yes.
So it's like, it's turning really into a little bit of a cat fight.
As politics so often do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Governor Schaefer also returned that day from his trip to the Virgin Islands and held his own press conference that didn't promise as much as Dunillow. He claimed the policy of secrecy around the students in college would continue at least until the Attorney General, his name was Sennett, reported back tomorrow after a study of each of the 6 students and their parts in the incident. So everyone's like, we can't tell you yet, but we're going to tell you tomorrow. Then we're going to tell you tomorrow. Then we're going to tell you tomorrow, pushing it off. At this point, it's been almost a week.
Okay. God. Long week.
I know.
Governor Schaefer's like, have you ever had conch? It's delicious.
Exactly. Like, can we talk about my trip? No one ever wants to talk about my trip.
Duffy and the kids just loved snorkeling.
I love snorkeling.
Snorkeling is the greatest.
God, it's the best.
Why go all the way down in the water where you can just look down from the top of it?
Absolutely. I'm too scared to scuba.
Oh, yeah. I think that diving is for people who make very good decisions under pressure and are detail oriented. And I do not identify that way.
Nope.
So
I am a panicker. So then a representative out of Pittsburgh calls out Governor Schaefer for refusing to disclose the name of the school because it's led some people to the, quote, idea that it was some kind of hoax. Ding,
no.
Ding, ding. Our favorite thing, Sarah.
My favorite word, hoax. Or as they say in Pennsylvania, hoax.
So the state health secretary then kind of demands the heads of 68 Pennsylvania colleges to submit reports on the use of drugs on their campuses.
What a great use of everyone's time. I love this.
Right? Then Governor Schaefer, still refusing to say what school it was, orders the Pennsylvania Justice Department, in addition to the FDA, to begin a full-scale investigation on these 6 blinded college students.
And where exactly they went.
They were joined in the task by the Drug Control Unit of the Health Department and the State Police Narcotics Unit. It is all hands on deck to figure out what happened with these 6 students. And then the Attorney General is still kind of leading the charge. Like, this is kind of all he's up to right now, is figuring all this out.
Yeah. This is so ridiculous, but like in a sense, it is so charming about humans that like we feel so motivated and called to action by just sort of imaginary stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. More than real things.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what moral panics are, right?
There you go. Yeah. Our love for the imaginary over the real, because dealing with a real problem that's right in front of you that everyone understands why it's happening is very hard.
It's not as fun of like a crusade too.
And you just have to keep doing it forever.
Okay. So this same day, January 18th, Governor Schaefer promises that when the investigation by all of these different units...
All other crime in Pennsylvania is being ignored at this point. It's just the purge.
It feels that way to me. Yeah, it's the purge. Get a mask. Join a press conference. But Governor Schaefer says that once the investigation is completed, quote, all the details in the public interest will be made public.
Oh, great. And everyone gets a free toaster.
Yeah. So then... January 19th, the next day, the headline is, State Aid Ousted for Fake Story of LSD Blinding. It's like, we will make all the details public finally. And then,
well, it was a great story.
It was a good story. So the article that was like wired around said, Governor Raymond P. Schaefer on Friday branded as a hoax a story that 6 Western Pennsylvania college students were blinded in 1966 by staring at the sun while under the influence of LSD. Schaefer immediately suspended the man he said perpetrated the hoax, Dr. Norman P. Yoder. Yoder admitted to fabricating the sensational story, Schaefer said, because of his concerns about widespread use of LSD among Pennsylvania's youth. Then Yoder was admitted to a hospital at his own request. The medical director at the center where Yoder was admitted to said that he's, quote, undergoing examination and treatment for his emotional disturbance. He's feeling depressed about what happened.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. So then the attorney general, who was leading all of those different departments in investigating this, the article says, Attorney General Senate said that last Wednesday, Yoder falsified records using extracts of actual blind cases in his files to support the story of the LSD blindings, which shook the state and the nation.
Wow.
According to the investigators, the false documents were actually prepared by Yoder's secretary because Yoder is blind. The secretary read the records and Yoder told her what to do, Schaefer said. So the inconsistencies in the story became pretty apparent immediately when the attorney general started to look into it. One of the 6 students who was allegedly blinded in this incident had actually been receiving state aid for a long time before the incident. Another wasn't even a student at the time.
So somebody produced names at some point, but they were just kind of like as close as they could get or something.
Yeah, it was basically like he took all of these files that were real and he literally cut sections out of them.
Oh my God.
Removed names and then Xeroxed them. So he really him and his secretary essentially,
they did some collaging.
Doctored reports. And with that, he was officially suspended from his position.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do that.
It is just like the classic thing of like, if you want people to be afraid of something, then like just tell them about what it actually does and don't feel the need to zhuzh it up too much, because then, you'll just end up looking really silly.
Yes, exactly.
And lying to people for that matter.
Well, and the lying is very interesting when you consider the fact that Dunnelow and Schaefer were like so sure that this was true.
Yeah.
And yet I don't know, because they said that they had heard about it 2 weeks before, but I just don't know when the doctor, it just feels like, were they hoaxed or were they driving the hoax for their own political interest?
Or did they get hoaxed and then realize at a certain point when it was too late to double back that it actually wasn't quite believable?
Well, and that's like a big part of this, right? Is it's like really embarrassing for the politicians involved. Like it's a pretty devastating thing to have happen to you as a public figure, is that you go like whole hog on a story and it turns out to be like a pretty like poorly executed hoax.
Yeah, and you're revealing yourself to the public as somebody who is easy to fool, basically, which you don't really want in a politician.
No, you don't.
Or I don't.
I don't.
Yeah.
However, the next day, we find out that Dunnelow is not ready to let go of the story.
Oh, okay.
So I'm assuming because of the embarrassment that we just mentioned, he is gonna kind of double down a little bit.
Double down on what?
Well, one article said Donalow insisted he knew the names of 2 of the 6 students who were said to have been blinded as a result of gazing into the sun while on an LSD trip.
He's like, all right, I can't get you all 6, but I can get you 2. That's pretty good.
I can get you 2. Donalow said he was checking further into the incident and expected, quote, to hit pay dirt this weekend.
Oh, my God.
So Donalow is a man who likes to push things off. He really likes to just kind of do the Casey Anthony thing that we've talked about, where he's like, I'm going to walk down this hall and tell the cops I worked at Universal Studios. I'm going to keep going, going to pass all through the offices.
At some point, if I believe hard enough, those college students are simply going to materialize in front of me. I hope.
I guarantee it. Yeah. And, she gets to the end of the hall, turns around, says, I don't really work here. And Donalow's not ready to say I don't really work here yet.
I do. Look, there's a lot you can say about Casey Anthony.
Like what?
But boy, does she keep a cool head under questioning.
That's true.
That's
true. Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we can all learn a little from that without being probably quite, awful.
Yes. A murderer.
Yeah.
So Governor Schaefer sees this as an opportunity to kind of change positions really quickly and then attack again his, Democratic associate, who he obviously does not like.
I guess it is a midterm year. Yeah.
Yep. So Governor Schaefer and the state attorney general demand that Donalow make public these facts that he has that nobody else has, right? Because he's like, we just did the most intensive investigation with every department that we could get involved. And yet, Donalow, you, sir, have information that we do not, right?
Allegedly, yeah. Some magical information that the information fairy brought. Not a midterm year, by the way.
But even Governor Schaefer at that point is like, we're still doing an investigation.
No.
Don't worry. We're like continuing this.
Just let's all just let it go, you guys. Let's walk away. Maybe people won't remember it.
But they can't do it.
No.
They can't let it go. So then another article, this is January 20th. So this has been, about 8 days. Goes like this. Governor Raymond P. Schaefer and just about every other state official got off the on-again, off-again LSD trip at the hoax station. But State Senator Benjamin R. Donalow is still aboard. Donalow said yesterday that the bizarre LSD blinding case was not entirely a hoax and that he had information that 2 University of Pittsburgh students lost their sight staring at the sun.
Give it up, man. You're going to run out of colleges soon.
I know. And it's also very, you cannot just start throwing out names.
You really can't.
No. 2 University of Pittsburgh students lost their sight staring at the sun while under the influence of the drug. His charge brought an angry denial from University Chancellor Wesley W. Posvar.
Thanks, Posvar.
Posvar said a thorough investigation had been conducted at the university and that there is no evidence whatsoever that would even lead to the suspicion of such an incident. He said investigators had checked with the Office of Student Affairs, Student Health Services, and academic and health records without uncovering a clue to his charge.
Yeah, I do feel like it is relatively easy to keep track of which of your students have recently gone blind by staring at the sun, even at a fairly large school.
I would say, especially if it were 6 of them at once.
Or even 2, I guess, in this case. Yeah.
Yes, true. Yes. So Posvar said, quote, the heads of these offices felt that the report of the incident was a hoax even before it was exposed as a hoax by Governor Schaefer. So there's just a serious doubling down, obviously continuing to happen.
Yeah. A very embarrassing one.
Really, it's very embarrassing.
Also, what I love about these stories is that, when a certain number of people believe what feels to us looking at it now like a pretty obvious hoax, there's always a certain number of people when it was all going down who are like, I don't think so. They just don't get it saved in the record in the same way necessarily.
Absolutely. And, it is sprinkled throughout these reports are little quotes here and there being this sounds like a folk story or this sounds like a hoax. So there are always people, but they're definitely not the ones that the newspapers are choosing to focus on until it's time to.
Yeah. Or they quote them very briefly at the end after 6 breathless paragraphs summing up what cops said.
Exactly. But then as soon as there is even a whiff of a hoax, they like to just switch and jam on that story as well, because a hoax is also good news.
It is. Yeah, that's my favorite kind, in a sense.
I agree. So then a couple days later, there's an article about how, about Dr. Yoder and kind of what happened with him. And people who worked with him said that leading up to the revelation that it was a hoax, he spent 3 days crying in his office and telling coworkers he was sick and needed to be in a hospital.
That's so sad.
I know.
Just don't do it.
I know.
It's too scary to get caught in a lie. Just try not to do it.
I agree. And his coworkers loved him. He was very, very, very well regarded in his field. By all accounts, he was a pretty lovely person. And, at this point, he's still in the hospital trying to get some kind of emotional help with what he's dealing with. So then the next day, Dunalow is still going, and he decides to accuse Governor Schaefer of suppressing information in the case.
Give it up, man.
He sucks. It's so funny.
It's like, shouldn't we talk about the economy?
Yeah, no kidding. So Dunalow is quoted in an article as saying, "We are not convinced that a high-priced and professionally trained Justice Department headed by a competent attorney general together with other members of the administration would have permitted the governor to appear at a press conference and release certain information to the public merely on the word of one individual without first verifying, investigating, and documenting the facts."
That is a good point.
But it's also Dunalow has been saying that he has all this information.
Right.
Even at this moment, he's like, I know things you don't know.
But no one can see it.
He's a real bitch. And I don't like the other guy either. I don't like any politician.
No. Yeah.
But let's be perfectly clear. But so at this point, he also kind of drops what he was saying the week before about the University of Pittsburgh and knowing this information to just yell at someone else for not releasing information. It's very chaotic. It's very messy.
Yeah. You got to have a plan when you go into this kind of a thing.
Yeah. So then the article goes on. State Attorney General William C. Sennett, who's the guy who was heading the whole investigation, requested Dunalow to turn over his information to the Justice Department. Quote, "Frankly, I don't think he has any information like that," Sennett said. The Justice Department said yesterday a preliminary check of the files of 252 blind Pennsylvania college students uncovered no evidence that LSD or other drugs were factors in their blindness. But Dunalow said an investigation he conducted turned up a case where 5 students from a Delaware Valley school, quote, "partook of dangerous drugs on the school campus in the dormitory, resulting in sickness, and one was taken to a hospital in serious condition."
He's just combing through existing cases, being like, that's kind of close. That's almost it. That'll do, I think.
But then guess what, Sarah?
Also not real.
He refused to name the students. But he said they had all been expelled. But yes, he refused to name them again.
Their names were John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And Schmitty.
So then we're not going anywhere with this, but the next day it's revealed that Dr. Yoder's wife was the secretary who helped him falsify the documents.
Oh my God.
I just had to include that.
Nepotism in the workplace.
So now, Sarah, here is your explanation of what actually happened, okay?
Oh boy.
And how we got to this point.
Yes, I'm dying to know how this all began.
Okay. So basically, Dr. Yoder, we knew this in the beginning, but it was very vague, and that he had gone to a federal official to tell him about this story. So this is what the article that came out a few days later said.
Okay.
Joseph Hunt was the federal official to whom Yoder first confided the tale in April 1966. Quote, "It was the evening of November 9th in Harrisburg. I was in town to make a speech, met Dr. Yoder, and asked him what was new and interesting." What Dr. Yoder had to say was so interesting that Hunt asked him for additional details in writing. 2 months later, the story reached the public prints, and for a week was a national sensation until the Pennsylvania official admitted to investigators that it was a hoax. So what I think happened was... And I'll get into a little bit more in a moment about why I think this, but I think that he heard this story that was already in existence and decided it was so upsetting that he wanted to use it to, you know, stop people from taking these drugs that were scaring the shit out of adults all over the country.
Yeah.
And I think that he thought by telling this federal official, maybe something good would come from it. But I don't think that he ever thought that it would become the story that it did. No. Right.
But it's when you have to start forging documents that, you know, becomes a problem. And do you think that he got hoaxed by like an urban legend that was already going around and was like, oh, no?
Well, we're going to get into that in a minute. I have some original. This is all stuff. A lot of the stuff we're talking about today is just a more detailed version of what is already out there. Like if you go on Snopes, you will read this story, but you will just have much less detail and far less fun asides about masked men at press conferences.
Baghead witness. Yeah.
But just we're going to wrap up with this story before we go back to that one. So I will say the one thing I like that Dunalow did is that he went to bat for Dr. Yoder and said he was only doing it because he cared.
Well, one thing about Dunalow, he doesn't give up easy.
Yeah, and it's like he's still making it like a good story and good that it happened. But you know, I think it's like, well, it's your fault that this happened. I imagine it seems like Ben Dunalow got his mitts on this information and decided to bring it to the public and to make a huge thing out of it, right? So I just don't think it would have happened if it weren't for these politicians.
He was the one who perhaps saw it as more advantageous to his career.
Absolutely. And he was already like positioning himself as an anti-LSD crusader. So it was like, what a perfect story. Couldn't be better, really.
Right. Which is how you kind of know that maybe it might be fake, but whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love the little detail from the beginning that's like, it was college students, not hippies. You know, it's like it's reaching into the good moral center of America.
College students, the ones we like.
Yeah, the ones that we love and are not trying to find ways to criminalize. So eventually Yoder tries to appeal his firing, hoping that he can get back to his position. Of course, he does not.
Yeah.
And then the one piece of nice news comes 6 months later that Dr. Yoder was offered a position with the Cleveland Society for the Blind as the director of staff development. So
it's going to start all over in Cleveland, the dream.
Yep, start all over in Cleveland. Yeah, so I don't think we'll ever really know whether the documents came. I think the documents came after the press conferences. I think that the governor and senator,
once it was out there, there was pressure to substantiate it, and it was going to make too many people look bad.
Yes, I think so.
I believe that.
Or he did it with the other guy first because the guy was like, I want more information. So maybe he did it with him.
I believe that too.
And they just the politicians just didn't really check the work. They just were like, oh, documents. That's enough for me. Yeah. It's really a mystery. And I don't think we'll ever know.
Where they're like, it's good enough and we need to keep this thing moving.
Exactly.
Yeah, because these stories have their own kind of momentum at a certain point.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody wants to, nobody wants to admit that they've been hoaxed or that they didn't look with any sense of detail at the stories that they're holding press conferences every day about. I mean, this was all that they were talking about for a week and a half. It's ridiculous. So back to your question about was this a legend that was already out there?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. But it's okay. So, all right, I'm going to get into this. So, this is my original work, Sarah. So this
I'm excited. This is my favorite thing.
I know. It's my favorite thing too. It's what I was put on this earth to do. So yes, as I mentioned, this hoax being kind of the nexus of the urban legend, already solved by folklorists. I'm just kind of giving more detail to what was already out there. But then I was like, a lot of these sources were like, they heard an urban legend and they repeated it, or Dr. Yoder heard an urban legend and repeated it. So I was like, okay, sounds reasonable. But then I found that the first mention of the story is from May 18th, 1967. So this is a year before. And it came out of Santa Barbara, but it was another newspaper article claiming that the story was true.
Which, again, a person trusts, even if the newspaper hasn't substantiated it enough.
Exactly. Because you're like, well, they have to have, even if they're not substantiating it fully to me, they must not be willing to take this risk professionally to just like say bullshit.
Exactly. You put a certain amount of faith in these authority figures in your life, and the newspaper is one of them.
Yes. So this is the article out of Santa Barbara from the year before. 4 admitted users of LSD have suffered permanent eye damage by staring at the sun while under the drug's influence, an ophthalmological group says. A spokesman said the sun gazing caused burning of the macula, a small part of the cornea.
I mean, yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, sure. As a result, he said, the 4, all college students, have lost their reading vision completely and permanently.
Oh.
In seeking treatment for eye injuries, 4 students in the University of California at Santa Barbara and another Santa Barbara City college reportedly said they had stared at the sun while under the influence of the drug. One of the university students was quoted as having said he was, quote, holding a religious conversation with the sun.
Oh, no, not a religious conversation.
It's so stupid. The 5, all males between 18 and 24 years of age, didn't feel any pain or discomfort while the sun was burning through the eye tissue.
I'm pretty sure they would, but
I know.
Whatever.
I know.
Sometimes when you're on acid, it hurts to have skin, you know?
I know, right? I know.
The problem, really, with politicians at this time is that they weren't doing enough acid.
That's very true. That's very, very true. And Robert Kennedy Sr. was one of the only politicians who was advocating for the use of LSD, which is kind of tracks for where we are now in a way. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not a straight line.
I'm a bigger fan of acid for sure than a lot of what's going around today.
Far more. More after this. And now back to the show. I'll just say right now, there was no evidence that these 4 mysterious, anonymous, separate guys tripped too close to the sun.
Despite having been quoted to make them seem more real.
Right. But again, no corroborating details.
Of course.
Never.
Why bother?
So, of course, I headed over to newspapers.com and I wanted to see if I could find any more about this story, if it was a one-off or, if there was a similar type of situation to the one that happened a year later in Pennsylvania. And what I uncovered, Sarah, I think might be a full-blown real-life conspiracy. Or as Keith Morrison would say, maybe.
Tell me more.
All right. Now we're going into a blanket territory of allegedly. All right, everyone, allegedly.
Okay. Yeah. Allegedly, everything is allegedly. Yeah.
So as I mentioned, there's like no corroborating details, and the existence of this article has been written about by folklorists. Like, it's not like I uncovered this article, but they've never really dug into the rest of the story. And usually when people write about it, they say that there are like no names attached to this at all. But I found a news report from the next day that mentioned Robert M. Mobley, and he is the foreman of the Ventura County Grand Jury where Santa Barbara is located.
Okay.
He's the only official that is quoted about this article. The article says, Mobley said today that he hoped the eye damage sustained by 4 Santa Barbara students from sun gazing on an LSD trip would be a warning to others. He's quoted as saying, and they say this stuff doesn't hurt you. I hate to hear of somebody being hurt like that. But if this story will be a warning and counteract what all of these people are saying, that the drugs don't hurt you, then maybe some good may come of it. He mentioned that the grand jury is very concerned about the drug problem in Ventura County and that they, quote, still don't know how to attack it. So we have our first character, okay?
Yeah.
Robert Mobley, grand jury foreman. So I was like, okay, there's not a lot more about the blinding story. Like, it doesn't become a huge thing like it did in Pennsylvania.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I know. It is interesting because it seems like it would, like it's like the first initial story was wired in different states, not every state, but it got around for sure. So I think it's very, very possible that Dr. Yoder just heard that this had happened and believed it to be true, because why would he not?
Yeah, it was in the newspaper. Why not?
So I was like, okay, since there's not more about this particular story, let's look at what was going on with LSD at this time in Santa Barbara, which turned out to be quite a bit.
Okay.
So within the month leading up to that story, there had been a couple massive dope raids, as the papers called them.
Of course.
70 young adults and teenagers were arrested for drugs varying from marijuana to heroin. And of course, LSD was kind of one of the big, scary boogeymen that they were talking about in these articles. And one name that kept coming up in all of these articles about the dope raids, and then the subsequent articles about, the dangers of LSD and how all of the, how the drug problem was exploding and all of, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we got to crack down and so on.
Exactly. But the name that kept coming up was a Republican senator from the district that these raids were happening in. And his name was Robert Lagomarsino.
All right.
Really good name. And, he was just doing lots of press conferences about these dope raids, about the dope problem, the LSD problem, etc. So exactly 1 month before the LSD eye damage story, the Ventura police started to lament that they were seeing a 400% increase in narcotics arrests, and pointed out that in just the first 2 months of the new year, there were almost twice the indictments of the entire previous year. And it's like, yeah, because you're doing big raids.
Right.
So stupid.
Just arrest fewer people and then you won't have to worry about it.
I know. It's just like, it's just in such bad faith to be like, crime is on the rise because we've set up a bunch of kids to get arrested to prove that crime is on the rise. Right. So Detective Sergeant Richard Burgess tells the newspapers around the time of these dope raids that LSD is the worst of the dangerous drugs, and that possession should lead to a first offense felony. And at the time, a bunch of other law enforcement officials are saying similar things. They're all calling for tougher legislation.
They should at least try it first, honestly.
It should be required to try the drug that you're trying to legislate against. So all of these different law enforcement officials are calling for tougher legislation and just basically more power, as they usually are, to punish these dopers.
Which is a really kind of classic element of American politics, I think, of just hey, there's this threat. It's scary in a lot of ways that I can't substantiate quite, but I'm going to tell you all about. Please give me more power to deal with it. I might have made it up.
Exactly. That's just politics and police work, it seems like.
The cornerstone.
It is.
Of our great democracy.
So after these dope raids, our grand jury foreman, Robert Mobley, appears in the news. So again, this is before the blinding story, but, within the month before when they're doing these dope raids. And he is mentioned as returning, along with the rest of the grand jury, 33 indictments on the dope raid case. And most of them are juveniles. He says, quote, "The grand jury is quite concerned about the dope problem. We were not aware that it was so widespread, and it was just as shocking to us as it was to others." He expresses his hope that any juveniles arrested will have their names printed in the newspaper alongside those who are of age. So he wants anyone arrested to have their name in the paper and just ruin their life.
Of course. Ideal.
Yeah, of course. The article goes on to say that the lawmen in the country are, quote, "beginning to cultivate informants and obtain information on possible narcotics violators." About a week later, the senator, Lagomarsino, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Lagomarsino, writes an open letter to the Superior Court judge to support both expanding drug education and giving greater support to law enforcement to arrest and the courts to prosecute.
Yes, we must protect the children by arresting them.
But you can see that we're starting to, in the month leading up to this story, there's a motive, right? There's there's legislation.
We have to establish a threat.
Exactly. We have to establish this threat. So we arrest all of these kids, say that the rates of use are skyrocketing because look at how many arrests we're doing.
And if anyone questions us, we need proof that this drug is really as dangerous as we say it is.
Yes.
In some kind of a compelling anecdote.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be perfect? So Lagomarsino, again, is quoted saying, one of the most serious social crises to ever face the state of California is LSD. The time for wrist slapping is past. So again, he's setting this like narrative of we need kind of more law and order to combat this threat. He puts forth a bill to prosecute any dealer who says this is LSD, but then it turns out it's not LSD.
All right.
And it's like, it sounds like you just got like shafted and you're pissed about it. But
the anti-Rudy bill.
Exactly. He then calls LSD, quote, an extremely serious problem and apparently growing worse. While we must upgrade our education efforts, at the same time, we must pursue a relentless effort to apprehend, prosecute, convict, and put away the pushers of this extremely dangerous substance.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, look, there's things that you can do to protect the youth, but like, this can't be it, you know? And it also feels like it's being framed once again as like this outside force that's coming in to corrupt the youths and to turn them against adults. And it's like, well, just calm down. Like they do need protection. They do need help in some ways, but like, you're not afraid because of how big of a threat it is. You're afraid because it seems to be helping them to establish a counterculture that you don't understand and you can't control. And so, you know, just be honest.
100%. 100%. And in addition to that, just the social boogeyman that you can use to bolster a political career, which I think is
of course
largely what's
useful.
happening here. Yeah. So all of that is happening again, you know, in the 30 days before the blinding story comes out. Then the blinding story comes out. 5 days after that, Lagomarsino submits a bill that would extend the maximum probation period in narcotic misdemeanor cases from 3 to 5 years, specifically saying that the new legislation was targeting LSD.
Gotta love the war on drugs.
Right. And he doesn't explicitly mention the blinding story. So, you know, it's not like he's wielding it the same way that the Pennsylvania officials were, but it just feels interesting that the timing of this would be so perfect.
It's convenient. Yeah, this unsubstantiatable story that really horrifies people and gets passed around and is very useful in this capacity of, well, we have to act fast and we have to act now. Because, of course, a great way to seize power is to say, we're having a crisis. We're in the middle of a crisis. Just give me all the power and I promise I'll give it back later.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, it's typical fascist shit. And then it makes me wonder, like, because this, again, you know, of course, happened before the Pennsylvania situation, but maybe these guys were smart enough to know that if there are no substantiating details, you shouldn't go around repeating a story that could easily come back and harm your career when it turns out that it's, you know, bullshit.
Right. Or you should keep it kind of to the back rooms, you know? Yeah,
exactly. But you put this, like, the stories out there, so it's disseminating. So you don't really need to bring it up.
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yep. I believe. Yeah. And I guess the guys in Pennsylvania maybe flew a little too close to the sun.
Blinded themselves a little too close to the sun.
No.
So now we have these two people in the story. We have Senator Lagomarsino, who is obsessed with cracking down on LSD in various ways. We have grand jury foreman Robert Mobley, who was the only official that commented on the story publicly and obviously has his own strong feelings about the LSD problem. So then I was like, okay, could these two men be more connected than just being kind of distant coworkers?
Well, you went full JFK on this one.
Yeah, I did. So if we go back even farther before the dope raids, for an entire year, Lagomarsino had been trying to get anti-LSD legislation passed. The federal government was in the process of banning the sale of LSD, and his state government was working on banning possession as well as emboldening law enforcement. So it was like they were kind of one punitive step ahead of the federal government. And that's largely because California obviously was the home of the, you know, LSD craze, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like. And also just sort of was seen by the rest of America at that point as a countercultural threat.
Yes.
Even if, you know, in its bones, it's always been mostly conservative.
Yes. So In one article from May of 1966, almost exactly 1 year before the LSD blinding story was printed, a Democratic senator said that Lagomarsino's bill was kicking a dead horse since the governor was already signing similar legislation. So basically they were saying that Lagomarsino was just posturing for political points.
It's already happening. You're just trying to get extra credit for it.
Exactly. And being performative, essentially, was what he said. But at the very bottom of that article, I found this little note that said that Senator Lagomarsino has relayed that he's chosen his campaign committee men. And right there in the middle of the short list is none other than Robert Mobley. So... I know. I was on a plane doing this. It's so ridiculous. I'm always whenever I'm working on a plane, I have to dim my screen and tilt it down so that the people directly on either side of me can't see what I'm doing, because I probably get kicked off the plane most of the time.
Just like Will Graham. Yeah.
So over that year of trying to get his performative LSD legislation passed, he had been facing a ton of roadblocks from Democrats that, again, thought his bills were redundant. And he was very mad. So there's a lot of him and his colleagues just being mad and saying Democrats don't care about the LSD problem, with Democrats saying well, we don't need to care about it because there's already legislation in the works.
Right. And also, it's not like people are staring at the sun or anything.
Exactly. So... I just think it's interesting to note that while all of this is going on, Lagomarsino is also actively voting to repeal the law that forbade housing discrimination right when a lot of Black servicemen were coming home from Vietnam. So he was like, no, you shouldn't get any benefits because you're Black. So that's just a little bit more into his priorities.
But I should get a nice salary for lying, though.
Exactly. Now, if we fast forward back to 6 months after the blinding story, I hope everyone's still following, grand jury foreman Robert Mobley, the man who was the only official to comment on the story, had this to say. Quote, the effect of the grand jury's recommendation would be to reduce the penalty that could be given for possessing marijuana and raising the penalty for having dangerous drugs. Robert Mobley, grand jury foreman, said, quote, LSD is as dangerous, if not more so, than marijuana. He said the grand jury had been considering the action for some time and noted that the Marin County grand jury had passed a similar resolution. So again, this is right. This is 6 months after. Robert Mobley is still trying to push the same type of legislation that Lagomarsino is. And exactly 1 year after the LSD story, Sarah, I have one more photo or one more newspaper clipping that I would like for you to take a look at.
Each mask scarier than the last.
When we're talking, and especially when we're talking about the relationship between these two men that were so heavily involved in what was going on with LSD at the time. So keep in mind, when I found this, I was looking for a connection between these two men. All right, I texted it.
Oh, shit.
You want to read this political advertisement?
It's a photo of them smiling at each other. And this is a campaign ad that says, he knows the state. He knows the county. Elect Mobley June 4th, Republican candidate for assemblyman. And then there's a picture caption, Bob Mobley confers with Senator Lagomarsino. And they're conferring, and they're just having such a good time conferring.
Exactly. And boy. I don't know. I found this and I was like, okay, well, there is certainly something there.
That is one magic bullet.
So, yes, we have a possible conspiracy, allegedly, and we will never, ever know if this story was planted in the papers by Bob Mobley, as he's known in this article, or Lagomarsino, if they had anything to do with it. I don't know. This is total conjecture, but I just thought it was really worth talking about.
Yep. And so basically it implies potentially that this story was strategically spread around by local politicians in an attempt to further their own careers.
Yes, that is my hypothesis.
And then after it had served its purpose, it kept wandering around and it eventually made its way to Pennsylvania, as everything does in the end.
Exactly. Where they just made an absolute shitstorm out of it and really ended up hurting their own careers. So yes, that's what we have. A possible conspiracy, maybe a conspiracy theory, if you will.
I believe it, Fox.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So that was my several day long obsession that I wanted to bring to you. So
I love it. And I feel like you can have a nice combination of like guys who are being cynical, you know, with the way that they're using this narrative, but also enough people who believe it because they want to believe it because it makes sense to them and supports their worldview. And that is a big motivating factor in leading us to believe things, I think, especially if they're kind of hard to support medically.
Yes, absolutely.
But so the good news is that we don't have cases of people going blind by staring at the sun.
There are cases of people going blind by staring at the sun.
Oh no. Or they on LSD specifically, or were they just, bored?
It's kind of like hard to know. Like they
didn't go and get drug tested immediately.
Yeah. I decided not to go too deep into it because it's not necessarily that something like this is totally impossible. I mean, the idea that you could lay there and keep your eyes fucking open while the sun burns that baby is
convincingly simple.
Yeah, is kind of ridiculous. But I know there's been eye damage to people. Some have assumed that it's because they were on LSD at the time. Maybe it was. Maybe there were other factors.
Yeah. But, I think the sober people sometimes do that as well.
Yes, I know. Exactly. And that's the thing is like what's important about this story, I think, is the way that tales like this can be at first created or at least used to further political aims.
Yeah.
And then they kind of disseminate into culture because the original story is what everyone remembers. And unless you're following a hyper-specific story out of Pennsylvania, or you're doing like absolutely absurd research to find a conspiracy in Santa Barbara, you're just going to remember the original story. Like you said, you're going to trust the newspapers that why would they print this if it was completely fake?
Yep.
But they do.
And because the longer the story plays out, the less compelling it gets. And eventually it turns into a bunch of guys lied. Can you believe it? And you're like, yeah, I can.
I certainly can. So that is the best I've got with the urban legend, the tale, the hoax around the LSD blindings. So
I love it.
Well, thank you for going on this trip with me, Sarah Marshall. Always a joy to share a hoax with you.
Thank you for going on this trip with me. And I don't know, I just find it reassuring in a way to get to talk about a story where, the kids are certainly going overboard at times, but basically just kind of trying to live. And it's all the 45-year-old, very square, responsible adult men with important jobs who are acting like complete idiots.
There it is.
It's always a pleasure.
There it is. And I think the last thing I want to say about what I think is so interesting about this particular story is in the original version, the students don't go fully blind, but they lose their ability to read. And I just think there's some kind of a metaphor in there about the way that LSD is harming our youths.
Now they can only listen to podcasts.
Yeah, that's it. So listen to this one. Find out that you were never blinded at all. You can see. It's a miracle. All right, Sarah. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Chelsey. It's always a good trip with you.
This was American Hysteria. Before we go, we want to strongly encourage everyone to fight back against the escalating horrors that our immigrant neighbors are facing daily. One way to help is to donate to and spread the word about immigrationadvocates.org, which provides a state-by-state directory of nonprofit organizations that provide free or low-cost immigration services. Another place to donate is CHIRLA, CHIRLA. They have an immigrant emergency assistance program called iRelief Fund, which provides direct financial support to families in emergency need regardless of immigration status. There are also many local organizations you can donate to or volunteer with, and you can find local phone numbers that you can text if you see ICE agents in your area. There's a directory at nnirr.org. We'll have all these links in the episode notes. Help spread the word to those who may not be paying attention and stay vigilant. We have to keep each other safe, and also fuck ICE. Please take care. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to listen to You're Wrong About and You Are Good wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support our show, and we could really use your help now more than ever, you can become a patron or an Apple Plus subscriber. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as bonus content, like the podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we're covering or stories that we know that you'll love. Just go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. If you go to AmericanHysteria.com, you can leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up, and we might do an entire investigation about it. You can also follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Ziegler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have as good a week as possible.